It's 1975. A basement lab in Rochester, New York. A 24-year-old engineer plugs a homemade box into a television, and a face appears on the screen. No film. No darkroom. No waiting. He's just built the world's first digital camera. It weighs 8 pounds and looks like a toaster with a lens taped to it. And he works for Kodak, which is about to make this the most expensive invention nobody wanted. Yes, that Kodak. The one that went bankrupt because of digital photography. They didn't get beaten to it. They got there first, looked at what they'd made and put it in a drawer. So how does a company invent the future and then hide it? Not through stupidity. That's the uncomfortable part. Every step they took made perfect sense at the time. Rewind 90 years. A bank clerk named George Eastman has one stubborn idea. Photography shouldn't need a professional, a tripod, and a chemistry degree. Anyone should be able to press a button. So that became the slogan. You press the button, we do the rest. And Kodak sold the camera at barely a profit, almost cheap enough to hand out for free. Which sounds generous until you see the trap. Every photo you took needed film. Every roll needed developing. Every print needed chemicals. Sell the camera once, sell the film forever. The camera was the razor. Film was the blades. And behind every snapshot sat an entire industry of darkrooms and chemicals, all of it flowing back to one company. This wasn't a product. It was a machine that printed money on a loop. It worked absurdly well. 145,000 employees. Factories running around the clock. In Rochester, Kodak didn't just employ people. It built their neighborhoods and funded their schools. By mid-century, they sold roughly 90% of the film in America. Not the leading brand, practically the only brand. When you pictured a photograph, you pictured that yellow box. Your parents' wedding. Your first birthday. That holiday nobody can find the photos from anymore. For 100 years, the story of your family was told on Kodak film. They didn't sell a product. They owned memory. And here's where it gets dangerous. When you've won that completely for that long, a quiet belief settles in. Not arrogance exactly. Just an assumption that tomorrow will look like today. Which brings us back to 1975, and a young engineer named Steven Sasson being handed the most boring assignment in the building. See if you can build a camera that doesn't use film. Nobody expected anything. He built it out of junk. A lens from a scrap bin. Circuit boards. A cassette recorder bolted on the side for storage. It looked less like a camera and more like a science project that got out of hand. 8 pounds. 2 hands to hold it. Slow, clumsy, and barely functional. And about to do something no camera in history had ever done. He asked a lab assistant named Joy to sit for the first picture, pointed the box at her, and pressed the button. Then everybody stood there. For 23 seconds. Waiting for one photograph to save. The result was black and white, unbelievably grainy, and about 1/100th of a megapixel. Genuinely worse than the film camera sitting on the same bench. Which is exactly why everyone missed the point. No film. No chemicals. No shop, no envelope, no waiting a week for prints. The quality was terrible and completely irrelevant. Quality improves. The absence of an entire industry does not unhappen. Sasson wasn't naive about it either. He figured it'd take 15, maybe 20 years for digital to rival film. He was almost exactly right. Now he just had to explain that to the people upstairs. So he picks up 8 pounds of wires, walks it into a room full of Kodak executives, and shows them the future. This meeting is the whole story. Everything after it is consequence. They watch politely. He explains where it's heading. And then somebody asks the question that ends it. Why would anyone want to look at their photographs on a television? And here's the part that gets you. Nobody laughed. Nobody shouted it down. They just moved on. Polite, patient, and completely certain. That quiet is the sound of an empire deciding its own ending. But be fair to them for a second because they weren't looking at a camera. They were looking at a machine that made film unnecessary. And film wasn't part of the business. Film was the business. Do the maths from their chair. Film prints money today. This thing makes nothing, needs decades of development, and destroys your only revenue stream on arrival. What exactly are you supposed to say? So Kodak does something almost poetic. They patent the invention, locking it down so nobody else can use it, and then they shelve it. Sasson was reportedly told not to talk about it publicly. And that decision gets made again and again every quarter for years. Each time it's the sensible call. That's how giants walk off a cliff. Never in one dramatic leap, always in small reasonable steps. There's just one problem with hiding an idea behind a patent. Patents expire. Yours runs out, the idea belongs to everybody, and the clock has been ticking the entire time you sat on it. Meanwhile, in Japan, Sony and Canon and Nikon start chasing digital properly. And crucially, none of them have a billion-dollar film business to protect. For them it isn't a threat. It's an open door. Even Kodak's great film rival, Fujifilm, saw the same storm coming and did the opposite, reinventing itself into completely new industries. Same threat, same moment, opposite choice. Remember that because it matters later. And for a while none of it seems to matter. In 1996, Kodak's revenue hit $16 billion, an all-time high. From outside, the giant looks healthier than ever. This is the top of the mountain. Then digital arrives properly, almost exactly on the timeline Sasson predicted 20 years earlier. Affordable cameras fill the shelves. No film. No developing. And people quietly stop reaching for the yellow box. Then phones grow cameras and it stops being a competition at all. The exact thing those executives couldn't imagine anyone wanting is now in a billion pockets, being used several hundred times a day. Now, the version of this story where Kodak just sat frozen doing nothing? That's not true. They fought hard. They built digital cameras, and for a while they were one of the best-selling brands in America. But here's the catch that doomed all of it. Film made them rich because nearly every dollar was profit. Digital cameras? Everyone made them, prices collapsed, and the margins were almost nothing. They were trading a business that printed money for one that barely broke even, and losing that one too. Their share of the American camera market slid from 25% to 15% to 7%. So they survive on the deepest irony available. They make billions licensing their old digital patents to the very companies now beating them. Kodak was literally living off the future it locked in a drawer. In 2011, that money falls off a cliff. Billions a year down to under 100 million. The last cushion is gone, and there's nothing between Kodak and an edge it's been walking toward for 35 years. The cuts come in waves. Tens of thousands of jobs. Factories that ran for a century go quiet. In Rochester, the company that built the city starts pulling the ground out from under it. And this was never just a company story. Families who'd worked there for 3 generations watched the news with genuine dread. When something this big falls, it doesn't fall alone. January 19, 2012. The company that taught the world how to take a photograph files for bankruptcy. 145,000 employees have become 19,000. And to pay what it owed, Kodak auctioned off its crown jewels, the digital imaging patents. Sold to its rivals for about $525 million. Invented it, buried it, then sold it. 3 acts of the same tragedy. As for Sasson, decades later gray-haired, he stood in front of the President of the United States and collected a national medal for inventing the digital camera. The guy they politely ignored was right about all of it. And that toaster he cobbled together from scrap sits behind glass in the Smithsonian now. The invention Kodak hid in a drawer became one of the most important devices of the century. So let's answer the question properly. Kodak didn't miss the future. They didn't lack the talent or the technology or the warning. They had all 3 in one room in 1975. What they couldn't do was kill the thing making them rich. And that's a much harder problem than being slow, because every quarter the safe choice really is the safe choice, right up until it isn't. Success creates comfort. Comfort creates a fear of losing what you've got. And that fear is how the most powerful companies on earth quietly walk off a cliff, one entirely reasonable quarter at a time. And it keeps happening. Giant after giant, absolutely certain their way of doing things would last forever, right up until it didn't. The names change. The mistake almost never does. Which is why the usual lesson here is wrong. Kodak's failure wasn't a failure to innovate. They innovated brilliantly. It was a failure of nerve. The hard part isn't inventing the future. It's being willing to destroy your own present to get there. And before you're too hard on those executives, somewhere right now, a comfortable, very successful company is looking at its own version of that blurry photo on a television and deciding it isn't worth the risk. Every photo you've ever taken on your phone traces back to a machine Kodak built and then buried. So, honestly, sitting in that room in 1975, what would you have done? Backed the future or protected the film? I genuinely like to know.